Chapter 2, verse 23. And it came to pass that he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day. And his disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. And the Pharisees said unto him, Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? And he said unto them, Have ye never read what David did when he had need, and was an hungered, he and they that were with him? How he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat, but for the priests, and gave also to them which were with him. And he said unto them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. Let's back up to verse 23. Notice, if you're holding a Reformation era English Bible, it says cornfields. Now, if you live in the Americas, which probably most of you, based on statistics, are, you may be thinking of maize, or that stuff that pops in the microwave, but that's not what Mark had in mind, seeing that maize was not indigenous to the Middle East until the 1500s, nor is it what any of the English-speaking translators of Reformation-era Bibles had in mind either. If you look up the definition of corn, say in Webster's, you'll find it is simply referring to a grain, a small hard seed of any cereal grass, like wheat, rice, barley, rye, and yes, maize. So, corn is a general term for an edible seed of a cereal grass. So, it's not referencing maize here. Okay, so moving on to verse 24. And the Pharisees said unto him, Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? Okay, so the Pharisees are pointing to the disciples eating these seeds and saying what they're doing is not lawful on the Sabbath day. But it's interesting, if you look at Matthew's account, in Matthew chapter 12, verse 7, Jesus said what they were doing was they were guiltless for what they were doing. Matthew 12, let me get there and read it for you. Matthew 12 and verse 7. But if ye had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, ye would not have condemned the guiltless. All right, so the Pharisees looked at what the disciples were doing and said it's not lawful. Jesus said they were guiltless. So what's up with that? What's going on? What did the Pharisees mean? Well, they did not mean that the disciples violated any clear command of Scripture, or no doubt they would have provided that Scripture, but rather one of the many rules they added to Scripture. In fact, you can look up rules for the Sabbath and find a multitude of them that were added, at least 39 categories of work that is forbidden. Okay, so the disciples were violating one of their added-on rules regarding the Sabbath. What did Jesus mean when he said they were guiltless? Well, they were not violating any of God's laws regarding the Sabbath day. Jesus was not concerned with submitting to man-made religious law, which had been added to God's law. Now, here's some helpful advice when arguing with God. By the way, that's a strange position to be in, since he's the one that designed your mind. I'm not going to get into the irony of that, but if you're arguing with God, you're going to have to cite a greater authority than yourself. When you tell the creator of the universe, of man, and of the Sabbath itself that his disciples are in error, you're going to have to say more than just, they aren't following our rules. Jesus, in response, instead of asking a question like, What scripture are they violating? What law of God are they breaking? Which would make it clear that they had no scriptural case. Jesus strikes deeper and draws to the surface their hypocrisy. Verse 25 to 26, let's look at that again. And he said unto them, Have ye never read what David did, when he had need and was an hungered, he and they that were with him? How he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat, but for the priests, and gave also to them that were with him. Now you'll find that account in 1 Samuel chapter 21, verse 1 through 6. And you'll see in Leviticus chapter 24, verses 5 through 9, the instructions regarding the showbread. Quote, It shall be Aaron's and his sons', and they shall eat it in the holy place. Now, I think we can all agree what David did was at least scripturally questionable. What Jesus' disciples did was not. A scriptural case could possibly be made against David. A scriptural case could not be made against the disciples. Yet the Pharisees would justify David's actions. That's why Jesus mentioned it. The Pharisees would justify David's actions, yet condemn Jesus and his disciples, because they're being hypocrites. Now, in Matthew, he records Jesus referencing the priests working on the Sabbath day. In addition to referencing David in his disciples' defense, he references the priests working on the Sabbath. So I'm going to turn to Matthew chapter 12 and read verses 5 through 8. Or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say unto you that in this place is one greater than the temple. But if ye had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. Okay. So, all of them would agree that the priests had to work on the Sabbath because of their position in the temple. Okay? Yet, here's Jesus with a much higher position than that of any Levitical priest, being found guilty in the minds of these Pharisees, not for violating God's law, but theirs. Jesus could have said, If I didn't work on the Sabbath, the universe would unravel. If I didn't work on the Sabbath, you would unravel. But Matthew quotes him as referencing himself as, quote, one greater than the temple. So if the priests were okay to work because of their position in the temple, what about one greater than the temple? Namely, the creator of the universe. It should be common sense that he has to work or we're all dead. All right, verse 27. And he said to them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Man wasn't made for any individual observance or command. The Sabbath was not an end in itself. Man was not made for the Sabbath. Man was made for God. Revelation 4:11, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. Man, we were made for God. So the Sabbath is an aid to guide us to a better relationship with God, to worship God. So the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Verse 28, Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. Not the Pharisees. The Pharisees were not the lords of the Sabbath. They don't get to dictate or micromanage what everybody does on the Sabbath, where Scripture is silent. So Jesus, being the Lord of the Sabbath, doesn't mean he has the right to violate his own will. He'd be inconsistent morally. But we should give him the benefit of the doubt when he is the very author of the Sabbath. Okay, let's read chapter 3, 1 through 6. Here's another incident that Jesus is involved with on the Sabbath. Not much extra commentary is needed to understand this. Let's just enjoy verses 1 through 6. And he entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand. And they watched him, whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. And he saith unto the man which had the withered hand, Stand forth. And he saith unto them, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. And when he had looked round about on them with anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he saith unto the man, Stretch forth thine hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored whole as the other. And the Pharisees went forth, and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. So Jesus, being a light into the world, being a healer of the cripple, being a healer of the blind, being a healer of the devil-possessed, is hated, rejected. Isaiah 53, he is despised and rejected of men. He didn't exalt them as they wanted the Messiah to do. He didn't conquer the Romans and give them a high political position as they wanted him to do. He was despised and rejected. We esteemed him not. All right, next week we will look at the 12 disciples.